It's the end of September 1939, less than a month after Britain declared war on Germany. So where is the British Army? In this video, we go around the world and look at where British soldiers were stationed at the end of September. The figures in this video were taken from the general return of the strength of the British Army on the 30th September 1939, a document held at the National Archives in London. This video is solely focused on the British Army, so we won't be looking at the Indian Army, Sudan Defence Force, Malay Regiment, etc. If you'd be interested in such a video, let me know in the comments below. The following figures come with a warning. By the time they were published, they were often already out of date, as units and soldiers were constantly on the move, especially from Britain to France. During September, over 50,000 men and women joined the army, and over 11,000 left for a variety of reasons. This meant that the strength of the British Army was in a constant flux, and its strength on a given date would vary depending on the sources used and how they are interpreted. Not including those serving with colonial forces, the strength of the British Army at the end of September was around 900,000. Despite these problems, the following figures will still give us a great idea of where the British Army was operating just after the outbreak of war and its commitments around the globe. I'm going to start with locations with the smallest number of British soldiers and work my way up. We start with Trinidad and Tobago, in the Caribbean, off the coast of Venezuela. There are just 2 soldiers serving on Trinidad, one from the Royal Regiment of Artillery and the other from the Royal Army Ordnance Corps. By the end of the year, this figure had only risen to 6. Our next destination is Cyprus in the eastern Mediterranean, which had a small garrison of 120 soldiers. Most, 101, are part of an infantry detachment. In the interwar period, this detachment was usually provided by an infantry battalion serving in Egypt or Sudan. There are also 4 soldiers from the Royal Corps of Signals on detachment from Egypt, 4 soldiers from the Royal Army Service Corps, and 5 from the Royal Army Medical Corps. By the end of the year, the British garrison had fallen slightly to 117. We now head to another island, this time Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, which had a garrison of 132 soldiers. Of these, 85 were serving with the 25th Heavy Battery of the Royal Artillery, 21 with the 43rd Fortress Company of the Royal Engineers. Our first location, which isn't an island, is Sierra Leone, on the west coast of Africa, which had a garrison of 145 British soldiers. All are stationed in the capital Freetown. Not the healthiest of places to serve, as many soldiers would catch malaria while stationed there. Its garrison included 40 soldiers serving with the Sierra Leone Heavy Battery of the Royal Artillery, and 21 with the 39th Fortress Company of the Royal Engineers. By the end of the year, the number had only increased to 195. Bermuda, in the North Atlantic, is next on our list, with 153 soldiers. 103 of these are from a detachment from the 2nd Battalion, King's Shropshire Light Infantry, which was stationed at Jamaica. St Helena, with 149 soldiers, is next. This remote island is in the South Atlantic and is famous for being the location of Napoleon's second exile after he was defeated at Waterloo in 1815. Of the 149 soldiers, 107 are serving with the Royal Artillery. Ceylon, present-day Sri Lanka, is next on our list with 398 soldiers. Of these men, 193 are serving with the 6th Heavy Regiment and 111 with the 14th Anti-Aircraft Battery of the Royal Artillery. Nearly the entire garrison of the island is stationed in the capital, Colombo. Aden, in what is now Yemen, had a garrison of 489 soldiers. It was of great strategic importance due to its position between the Red and Arabian Seas. The majority of the garrison could be found serving with the 9th Heavy Battery of the Royal Artillery, which had 244 soldiers, while the 20th Fortress Company of the Royal Engineers with 120. We now head back to the Caribbean and to Jamaica, where there were 737 British soldiers. Most are serving with the 2nd Battalion, King's Shropshire Light Infantry, who have 607 soldiers on the island. This battalion also had a detachment at Bermuda. Tianjin in China is located about 80 miles southeast of Beijing and had a garrison of 863 soldiers. The bulk of the garrison, 770 soldiers, was provided by the 1st Battalion Durham Light Infantry. In 1937, the city had fallen to the Japanese. There had been a major diplomatic incident between Japan and Britain in the city shortly before the outbreak of war in Europe. Note the difference in the city's spelling in 1939 compared to today. Burma, present-day Myanmar, had a small garrison of 1,588 British soldiers. Two infantry battalions, the 2nd Battalion King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry and 1st Battalion Gloucestershire Regiment, made up the bulk of the garrison, with 1,521 soldiers between them. Both battalions were stationed at Rangoon, now Yangon. Shanghai in China had a garrison of 1,659 British soldiers. Again, it is two infantry battalions which make up the bulk. They were the 1st Battalion Seaforth Highlanders and the 2nd Battalion East Surrey Regiment, with 1,547 soldiers between them. Next on our list is Sudan, which had a garrison of 2,453 British soldiers. Compared to Egypt in the north, Sudan had a small number of soldiers in the interwar period. Nearly all of them were stationed in the capital, Khartoum. There were 3,797 British soldiers serving at Hong Kong. Many of these soldiers were still stationed at Hong Kong when the Japanese invaded in December 1941. Gibraltar, at the southern tip of the Iberian Peninsula, only covers an area of 2.6 square miles and had a garrison of 4,268 British soldiers. Due to its strategic location in the Mediterranean and border with Spain, Gibraltar always had a large garrison considering its size. Malta, which also had a strategic location in the Mediterranean to the south of Sicily, had a garrison of 5,083 British soldiers, with the bulk, 3,100, belonging to 4 infantry battalions. Following Italy's declaration of war in June 1940, the island would be subjected to a devastating siege which lasted over 2 years. Malaya, present-day Malaysia and Singapore, had a garrison of 6,028 soldiers. Most of the soldiers were stationed at Penang or Singapore. Mandatory Palestine, which consists of what is now Israel and the Palestinian territories, had a very large garrison of 12,083 British soldiers. This was in consequence of the Arab Revolt, which had begun in 1936 and had ended just before the outbreak of war in Europe. The largest garrisons were at Gaza, Haifa, and Jerusalem. Egypt, with the vitally important Suez Canal linking the Mediterranean Red Sea, had a garrison of 18,429 British soldiers. India had the largest garrison of British soldiers serving abroad in the interwar period. At the end of September, there were 36,370 soldiers scattered across what is now India and Pakistan. The bulk of these soldiers, 25,414, were serving with infantry battalions. By the end of September, there were 121,111 soldiers serving in France as part of the British Expeditionary Force. The numbers would increase rapidly, and by the end of the year, there were 194,831 soldiers serving in France. It should come as no surprise that less than a month after the outbreak of war, the bulk of the British Army was serving in Britain. 673,126 soldiers were serving in Britain. There were also 9,961 soldiers serving in Northern Ireland and 259 in the Channel Islands. When added together, this gave a total of 683,346. If you'd like to learn more about the British Army during the war, make sure to subscribe. I also have a service on Patreon if you need help researching a soldier or a unit of the British Army during the war.